Good morning. Today I am reading from the sixth book of the Left Behind series. The name of the book is Assassins. And today I will be reading the last chapter in that book before we move to the next one. And this is chapter 23. As Buck showered Friday morning, he realized he would do anything but sacrifice his identity to be at the Wailing Wall that day. He believed Tyson, he believed the Bible, he believed the prophecies. He couldn't imagine anything as satisfying as seeing the mockers of Eli and Moshe get theirs. Buck had promised to help Jacob persuade Chaim to stay home from the gala finale that evening, provided he was fortunate enough to find himself in the 90% of Jerusalem that would be spared the foretold earthquake. Rayford slept most of the morning, ignoring his beeping cell phone, except to note that the caller every time was Leah. What could he say? Sorry, I can't pick you up tonight and ferry you back to the States, but I might be in prison or dead. He was careful to be well rested and well fed. He wanted to be prepared and sharp, regardless which way the day went. Rayford was also careful to pray that God would tell him if he was heading off on his own. He was willing to get to the plaza at least 3 hours before sundown, stay in the middle of the crowds, and make sure he was in the spot he had scouted. Past that, God would have to pull the trigger. Rayford glanced at his phone and punched up Leah's last message readout. Our bird has left the cage. Now what? Hattie was not at Buffer? Now what indeed? He phoned her, but now Leah wasn't answering. Buck was angry with himself for not going even earlier to the Wailing Wall. His spot on the rocky ledge was taken. GC guards let no one up the trees. The area teemed with drunken celebrants. Some Buck would have sworn had been there for days. How long could this party last? Dancing, public lewdness, shouting, singing, drinking, people staggering about. Thousands chanted in various languages. Only the bravest, now approaching the blackening, oozing carcasses that had split in the heat of the sun. Buck smelled the rancid cadavers from 100 yards. Still, he was determined to get closer. He walked far around the left side of the wall and found himself in a grove of trees and high shrubbery. Buck couldn't risk being recognized, but this gambit was worth the danger. If it led, as he hoped, to the same underbrush that had allowed him to get close to Eli and Moshe once before without drawing the ire of the guards, he could be an eyewitness to one of the greatest miracles of history. Tyson and Chloe, up before dawn and watching TV again, took turns distracting Kenny when the cameras showed Eli and Moshe's gruesome remains. Awful as the deaths were, Tyson said, what is coming should be exquisite. He sat rocking on the couch, unable to sit still. Any time he caught Chloe's eye, he was reminded of his daughter when she was a little girl on the morning of her birthday. Buck slithered through the brush past two guard outposts and around the opposite side, where he was finally as close to the fence as he could be without being seen. He could not believe his luck. Unless by accident Buck would not be discovered, he was reminded of his admonition to Leah. We don't do luck. Thank you, Lord, he whispered. Buck could barely stand the sight of what was left of the mighty men he had come to love. Except for the occasional kicks from the most irrelevant of the partiers, the bodies had not moved in 3.5 days. Animals picked at them, birds pecked, bugs crawled. Buck decided he would not let his worst enemy rot in the sun. A band invaded the area, and the carousers began feverish. The bravest danced side by side, arms interlocked at the shoulders, encircling the bodies. Buck feared he would miss the miracle now, blocked by these crazy drunks. Their misshapen circle flattened as it snaked between the bodies and the fence. Faster and faster they danced until someone reversed direction. The whole line stopped and went the other way. But soon several had ideas of their own, and the thing disintegrated. Dancers collided, laughing, hollering, until tears rolled. A middle aged woman, one shoe missing, bent to vomit, and was bowed over by some who thought the circle was still going. Several went down, giving Buck a clear view of Eli and Moshe, now just hideous, distorted, repulsive collections of body parts and putrid piles. A sob of pity rose in his throat. Without warning, the dead men stirred. Buck held his breath. One by one, the crazies shrieked, fell back, and drew the attention of the rest of the throng. Word spread that the corpses were moving, and the inner circle stampeded back, while these, hearing the commeration from farther back, surged forward. The music stopped. The singing turned to screams and agonizing wails. Many covered their eyes or hid their faces. Thousands fled. Thousands more came running. Eli and Moshe struggled to their knees, filthy bodies in slow motion, chests heaving, rugged, long fingered hands on their thighs. They blinked and turned to take in the sight. In tandem, they each put one hand on the pavement and straightened, slowly rising, eliciting terrible moans from the paralyzed onlookers. As they deliberately rose to full heights, the dried puddles around them stirred into liquid. Their gaping wounds mended, skin stretched and split from swelling, contracted, purple and black blotches fading. Hair and tissue from the fence and wall beyond disappeared, and the men became whole. Buck heard every screech from the crowd, but he could not take his eyes from Eli and Moshe. They gathered the folds of their robes in their fists at the chest, and the rest of the sackcloth fluttered clean in the breeze. They were again tall and strong, victorious and noble and stately. Eli and Moshe looked on the crowd with what Buck read as regret and longing, then turned their faces heavenward. They looked so expectant that Buck noticed many in the crowd looking skyward too. Snow white clouds rolled in deep blue and purple skies. The sun was hidden, then reappeared in a beautiful sky of moving colors and pure white vapors. A voice from above, so loud people covered their ears and ducked from it, said, "Come up here." Faces still upturned, Eli and Moshe rose. A collective gasp echoed through the Temple Mount as people fell to their knees, some onto their faces, weeping, crying out, praying, groaning. The witnesses disappeared into a cloud that rose so quickly it soon became a speck before it too vanished. Buck's knees buckled and he dropped to the soft soil, tears finally coming. "Praise God," he breathed. "Thank you, Lord." All around, thousands lay prostrate, keening, lamenting, pleading with God. Buck rose to rise, but before his legs were straight, the ground snapped beneath him like a towel. He flew back into a tree, scraping his neck and back as he tumbled. He leapt to his feet to see hundreds of people landing after being thrown even higher. The sky turned black, and cold rain pelted the area. From blocks away came the ominous crash of buildings, the crack and boom of falling trees, the smash of metal and glass as vehicles were tossed about. "Earthquake!" people shouted, running. Buck tottered out of his hiding place, amazed at how short and severe had been the tremor. The sun peeked through fast-moving clouds, creating an eerie green atmosphere. Buck walked in a daze in the direction of Chaim's home. Rayford had been watching on television from his hotel room. The quake cut the power and threw everything to the floor, including him. Almost immediately, GC public address trucks rolled through the streets. "Attention, citizens. Volunteers are needed on the east side of the city. Closing ceremonies will take place tonight as planned. Zealots have made off with the bodies of the preachers. Do not fall for fairy tales of their disappearing or their having anything to do with this act of nature. Repeat, closing ceremonies will take place tonight as planned." Mac had slept late, then turned on the television to watch the day's news. He wept as TV cameras showed Eli and Moshe resurrect and rise into the clouds. How would the GC refute what had been broadcast around the globe? David Hasid had reported that he had seen Carpathia's eerie interruption on TV Monday night, but that the incident did not appear on any tapes of the event, and now no replays of the resurrections appeared on the news. What power, Mac thought, what persuasive control, even of technology. If by some stretch Carpathia left Israel alive, Mac would not allow him to land alive, not on any plane he was piloting. But should he wait that long? He dug in the bottom compartment of his flight bag and fingered the contraband pistol just like the one Abdullah also carried. If Mac carried it that night, he would have to stay far from the metal detectors. Chaim's neighborhood had been hit hard. Bricks had been loosened, and a section of his garage had disintegrated. But unlike the flattened residents around his, Chaim's house had largely escaped damage. Power returned quickly to that area, and Buck watched the television reports with Chaim and the rest of the household. The death toll was announced in the hundreds, but quickly climbed into the thousands. Most of the damage indeed centered on the east side of Jerusalem, where buildings fell, apartment complexes collapsed, roads became upturned, ribbons of asphalt and mud, and thousands perished. By early evening, it was clear that about a tenth of the holy city had been destroyed, and that the death toll would reach at least 7,000 by morning. Every newscast repeated the incidents on the part of the GC that delegates should still attend the final ceremony. It will be abbreviated and appropriately morose, Leon Fortunato intoned. The Potentate is involved in the search and rescue operation, but he asks that I extend his heartfelt condolences to all who have suffered loss. These are his words. Reconstruction begins immediately. We will not be defeated by one defeat. The character of a people is revealed by its reaction to tragedy. We shall rise because we are the global community. There is tremendous morale building value in our coming together as planned. Music and dancing will not be appropriate, but we shall stand together, encourage each other, and dedicate ourselves anew to the ideas we hold dear. Let me add a personal word, Fortunato said. It would be most encouraging to Potentate Carpathia if you were to attend in overwhelming numbers. We will commemorate the dead and the valor of those involved in the rescue effort, and the healing process will begin. Buck had no interest in the maudlin imitation of the opening night, the potentates praising their fearless leader, and he hushishly charmed the crowd. You promised to be there, Chaim rasped. Oh, sir, the roads will be impassable. Wheelchair ramps may have been damaged. Just watch it on. Jacob can drive through anything and get me anywhere. Jacob shrugged. Buck made a face as if to ask why he hadn't supported Buck's refusal. He's right, Jacob said. Get him and his chair into the car and I'll get him there. I can't risk being recognized, Buck told Chaim. I just want to know you are in the crowd supporting me. The sun slipped out from under a bank of clouds and warmed Jerusalem. The orange highlight on the old city shocked Rayford in its beauty, but so did the devastation. Rayford couldn't imagine why Carpathia was so determined to go through with the schedule, but the Potentate was playing right into God's hands. Rayford stayed behind various groups, finally camping out in a cluster of people near the speaker tower to Carpathia's left as he faced the audience. Rayford guessed he was 60 or 70 feet from the lectern. I am not going, Abdullah announced. I will watch on television. Suit yourself, Max said. I'll probably regret going myself. Max sat in the shuttle van for more than 20 minutes before it finally pulled away. He glanced back to see Abdullah stride quickly from the hotel, hands inside his pockets of a light jacket. Buck arrived at the plaza before Jacob and Chaim and waited near the entrance emboldened by being patiently ignored. His new look was working, and anyway, it appeared GC workers were preoccupied preparing for a guest of honor, and here he came. Someone parked Chaim's vehicle while Jacob wheeled Chaim to the metal detector at stage right. Your name, sir? A guard asked. Jack, he's with me, young man, Chaim spat. Leave him alone. I'm sorry, sir, the guard said. We are on heightened security alert, as you can imagine. I said he's with me. That's fine, sir, but once he helps you onto the platform, he'll have to find a seat or stand elsewhere. Nonsense, Chaim said. Now, oh, boss, Jacob said quickly, I don't want to be up there anyway, please. Buck saw Chaim close his eyes wearily and wave with the back of his hand. Just get me up there. You have to go through the metal detector, the guard said. No exceptions. Fine, let's go. You first, son. Jacob's keys set off the alarm. He succeeded on his second try. I'll need you out of the chair briefly, Dr. Rosenzweig, the guard said. My men can support you. No, they can't, James said. Sir, Jacob said, he had a stroke. I know all about that. Do you want to insult an Israeli and may I say global statesman? The guard appeared at a loss. I have to at least search him. Very well, Chaim growled. Be quick. The guard felt Chaim's arms and legs and back, patted him down all over. Your getaway would have been little slow anyway, he said. Jacob and the three guards lifted the chair to the stage and rolled Chaim to the left end of the row of chairs. The guard signaled Jacob to return. I'm to leave him up here alone now? I'm sorry, the guard said. Jacob shrugged. Chaim said, Go on, I'll be fine. Jacob descended and joined Buck near the front. They watched as Chaim amused himself by steering the motorized wheelchair back and forth across the vast empty stage to the delight of the growing crowd. The sky was dark, but the vast lighting system bathed the plaza. Rayford guessed the crowd bigger than an opening day, but subdued. Their helicopters, having been pressed into earthquake relief, the VIPs were transported in a motor coach. No fanfare or music or dancing, no opening prayer. The potentates mounted the steps, shook hands with each other and with Chaim, and waited in front of their chairs. Leon walked Nikolai up, surrounded by the security detail. The assembled broke into warm, sustained applause, no cheering or whistling. Leon quickly introduced the potentates, then said, There is one other very special guest we are particularly pleased to welcome, but His Excellency has requested that privilege. And so, with heartfelt thanks for your support during this time, I give you once again His Excellency Nikolai Carpathia. Rayford reached inside his robe with both hands, separated the saber, and silently told God he was prepared to produce it at the right moment. A restrained Carpathia quickly quieted the applause. Let me add my deep thanks to that of our supreme commanders and also my abject sympathies to you who have suffered. I will not keep you long because I know many of you need to return to your homelands and are concerned about transportation. Flights are going from both airports, though they are, of course, delays. Now, before my remarks, let me introduce my guest of honor. He was to have been here Monday, but he was overtaken by an untimely stroke. It gives me great pleasure to announce the miraculous rallying of this great man, enough so that he joins us tonight in his wheelchair, with wonderful prospects of complete recovery. Ladies and gentlemen of the global community, a statesman, a scientist, a loyal citizen, and my dear friend, the distinguished Dr. Chaim Rosenzweig. The crowd erupted as Carpathia pointed toward Chaim, and Rayford sensed his opportunity. People in front of him lifted their arms to clap and wave, and he quickly raised the weapon and took aim. But Chaim reached with his good arm as if to offer it to Carpathia, and Nikolai bounded over to the wheelchair to embrace the old man. No way Rayford would fire that close to Rosenzweig. He lowered the weapon, hidden under the folds of his billowy sleeve, and watched the awkward embrace. Nikolai raised Chaim's good arm, and the crowd cheered again. Carpathia returned to the lectern. and the moment was lost. Mac McCollum knew Buck Williams was somewhere in the crowd. Maybe he would try to make contact when it was over. Was Abdullah also there? And why had he said he wasn't coming? Quivering from the close call, Rayford tasted bile. Carpathia so repulsed him. Fellow citizens, Nikolai began somberly, in the very young history of our one world government, we have stood shoulder to shoulder against great odds as we do tonight. I had planned a speech to send us back to our homes with renewed vigor and a rededication to global community ideas. Tragedy has made that talk unnecessary. We have proven again that we are people of purpose and ideals, of servanthood and good deeds. From behind Carpathia, 3 potentates rose. That seemed to obligate the other 7, who slowly and seemingly reluctantly stood. Carpathia noticed the attention of the crowd was behind him, and turned, seeing first 3, then all 10 potents stand and clap. The crowd joined the applause, and Rayford thought he saw Carpathia and Fortunato trade glances. Was someone afoot? Were those the 3 Mac had said might not be so loyal as Nikolai thought? The potentates set again, and for the first time since the meetings at Colic Stadium, Carpathia seemed at a loss for words. He started again, paused and repeated himself, then turned back to the potentates and joked, "Do not do that to me." The crowd applauded anew, and Nikolai milked the situation for a bigger laugh. Obviously covering his own concern, he began to speak, looked back quickly, and turned again, engendering titters from the audience. Suddenly, the 3 potentates stood again and applauded as if trying to make points with Nikolai, though Rayford noticed one had reached into the inside pocket of his jacket as he rose. It was clear the crowd thought the clapping potentates were some sort of an impromptu bit. When James suddenly steered his chair out of place and rolled toward Fortunato, the crowd laughed and exulted in earnest. Rayford was distracted from his left. Hattie? There was no way. He tried to keep her in sight, but the people in front of him raised their hands again, shouting, clapping, and jumping. He leveled the gun between them, aimed betwixt 2 security guards at Nikolai, and tried to squeeze the trigger. He could not. His arm was paralyzed, his hand shaking, his vision swimming. Would God not allow it? Had he run too far ahead? He felt a fool, a coward, powerless despite the weapon. He stood shaking, Carpathia in his sights. As the crowd celebrated, Rayford was bumped from the back and side, and the gun went off. At the explosion, the sea of panicked people parted around him. Rayford ran with a bunch of them, dropping the weapon and letting the other half of the box fall. People screamed and trampled each other. As Rayford pushed his way into a gridlock of bodies, he sneaked a peek at the stage. Carpathia was not in sight. The potentates scattered and dived for cover, one dropping something as he tumbled off the platform. Rayford could not see Fortunato either at first. The lectern had been shattered, and the entire 100-foot wide back curtain ripped off its frame and blown away from the stage. Rayford imagined the bullet passing through Nikolai and taking out the backdrop. Had God used him in spite of the cowardice? Could he have fulfilled prophecy? The shooting had been a mistake. He had not meant to do it. Buck had ducked under a scaffold at the sound of the gun. A tidal wave of humanity swept past him on both sides, and he saw glee on some faces. Converts from the Wailing Wall who had seen Carpathia murder their heroes. By the time Buck looked to the stage, the potentates were leaping off. The drapery was flying into the distance, and Chaim appeared catatonic, his head rigid. Carpathia lay on the platform, blood running from his eyes, nose, and mouth, and, it appeared to Buck, from the top of his head. His lapel mic was still hot, and because Buck was directly under a speaker tower, he heard Nikolai's It's liquid, guttering murmur. But I thought I did everything you asked. Fortunato draped his stocky body over Carpathia's chest, reached beneath him, and cradled him. Sitting on the stage, he rocked his potent, wailing, "Don't die, Excellency!" Fortunato bawled, "We need you. The world needs you. I need you." Security forces surrounded them, brandishing Uzis. Buck had experienced enough trauma for one day. He stood transfixed with a clear view of the back of Carpathia's blood-matted skull. The wound was unmistakably fatal, and from where Buck stood, it was obvious what had caused it. "I did not expect a gunshot," Tyson said, staring at the television as GC security cleared the stage and whisked Carpathia away. 2 hours later, GC CNN confirmed the death and played over and over the grieving pronouncement of Supreme Commander Leon Fortunato. "We shall carry on in the courageous spirit of our founder and moral anchor, Pochtit Nikolai Carpathia. The cause of death will remain confidential until the investigation is complete, but you may rest assured the guilty party will be brought to justice." The news media reported that the slain Pochit's body would lie in state in the New Babylon Palace before entombment there on Sunday. "Don't leave the TV, Chloe," Tyson said. "You have to assume the resurrection will be caught on camera." But when Friday became Saturday in Mount Prospect and Saturday night approached, even Tyson began to wonder. The scriptures had not foretold of death by projectile. Antichrist was to die from a specific wound to the head and then come back to life. Carpathia still lay in state. By dawn Sunday, as Tyson gloomingly watched mourners pass the glass beer in the sun-drenched courtyard of the GC Palace, he had begun to doubt himself. Had he been wrong all along? 2 hours before the burial, David Hasid was called into Leon Fortunato's office. Leon and his directors of the intelligence and security huddled before a TV monitor. Leon's face revealed abject grief and the promise of vengeance. "Once His Excellency is in the tomb," he said, his voice thick, "the world can approach closure. Prosecuting his murder can only help. Watch with us, David." The primary angles were blocked, but look at this collateral view. Tell me if you see what we see. David watched. "Oh no," he thought, "it couldn't be." "Well," Leon said, peering at him, "is there any doubt?" David stalled, but that only made the other two glance at him. "The camera doesn't lie," Leon said. "We have our assassin, don't we?" Much as he wanted to come up with some other explanation for what was clear, David would jeopardize his position if he proved illogical. He nodded. "We sure do." "The second woe is past. Beyond, the third woe is coming." Revelation 11:14. And that is the end of that book. And next we'll be reading the 7th book in the Left Behind series. And we'll be reading chapter 1 in that book. And that book, the name of that book is going to be, The Indwelling. So we'll be reading chapter 1 in The Indwelling. And I thank you for joining me. Have a wonderful day.